but you definitely get the more dad, parent type material in, of course, Bill Burr fashion, where he weaves in his rage and anger issues and trying to balance that with checking yourself and not trying to project that onto your kids, as I can definitely relate to. And I'm sure many of you can as well. Break that cycle, folks. If not you, then who? What up, folks? What's going on? Welcome to the Spun Today Podcast, the only podcast that is anchored in writing, but unlimited in scope. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz, and I appreciate you listening. In this episode, I speak about watching Bill Burr's latest comedy special, live at Red Rocks. I also speak about watching the movies 4th of July and A Journal for Jordan. But first, I'm going to share with you a way that you can help support the Spun Today Podcast. Your support means a ton. In practical terms, it helps free up my time so that I can do more of what I love, which is podcasting and writing. It helps add to that ever-tilting balance of full-time job, part-time hobby, and as Everlast would say, flip it into a full-time hobby and a part-time job. So here's a way that each and every one of you listening right now can help me do just that by supporting the show. Then we'll jump right into the episode. If you're a fellow creative, a cool way that you can help support the Spun Today podcast and actually be part of the podcast is by filling out my 5-question questionnaire located at spuntoday.com/questionnaire. Here you'll find 5 open questions related to your craft, your art, what inspires you to create, what type of unrelated hobbies you're into, and what motivates you to get your work done. You can choose to remain anonymous or plug your website and your work. And once you submit your questionnaire, I read your responses on a future episode of the Spun Today podcast. It's completely free at no cost to you. And what I like to say about it is that if your responses could potentially spark inspiration in someone else, why not share that? spuntoday.com/questionnaire. Bill Burr's latest comedy special, Live at Red Rocks, dropped fairly recently here in good old 2022. And it was a dope special, really funny. I really enjoyed it, more so than I did his previous one, Paper Tiger, which I still really enjoyed, but I just didn't think it was as good as Walk Your Way Out or I'm Sorry You Feel That Way. And not by much, still a great special, Paper Tiger was. I mean, you're always going to get top-notch quality when it comes to Bill Burr. It just wasn't, for my preference, his best work to date. And I always feel like rewatching that one, because it always gets like really great reviews. And it is. I've heard people say it's his best one compared to the previous ones. But, you know, para gusto se hicieron los colores, as they say. Or maybe it's just a time and place thing. Maybe at the time of Paper Tiger, I wasn't like in that space in terms of like the material connecting with me. Whereas with this latest special, Live at Red Rocks, I feel like definitely was. It's like post-children Bill. I don't think he had kids yet for Paper Tiger. Actually, no, that has to be wrong. Because Paper Tiger came out, like 2 years ago? Maybe 3, tops. And I think his oldest kid is 4 or 5, around that age, which you referenced in this special. But you definitely get the more dad, parent type material in, of course, Bill Burr fashion, where he weaves in his rage and anger issues and trying to balance that with checking yourself and not trying to project that onto your kids, as I can definitely relate to. And I'm sure many of you can as well. Break that cycle, folks. If not you, then who? Now, the venue where he filmed it was dope. I've heard the term Red Rocks, but I wasn't familiar. And what Red Rocks is a amphitheater that's an open air amphitheater, so it's outdoors, and it's built into a rock structure in the western United States, right by Denver, Colorado. Hence the name Red Rocks, in reference to the reddish-looking mountains that the theater is built on. And it's open there. It's really cool. I would love to see something there one day. And Denver, is known for being very left-leaning, very liberal. And it's always fun watching a comic that is witty enough and has the balls to like fuck with a crowd when that crowd is very left or very right. Like either way is like equally fun to me, because a comic like Bill could just like tear them up with sound, down the middle logic, balanced perspective that just gets like groans and oohs and ahs and shit like that. So that was definitely fun to see throughout the special. But here are some of my favorite lines and jokes, although I'm not going to do them justice, but spoiler alert, just in case you haven't seen the special. But I just love the craftsmanship, if you will, behind how some of these bits were written. And some stuff was just funny as fuck. But without further ado, he's speaking about cancel culture, again, in a very left-leaning Denver audience. You would think, being in Denver, but them being fans of Bill, probably a little more balanced. But he's making a greater point of how you have to judge things that happen within the context of the time that they happen. Not this like retroactive canceling like bullshit that goes on nowadays. When you dig up something from, decades ago that someone did or said, and then hold it against them based on today's standards. Now, there's obviously exceptions to that rule, right? Murder, rape, like serious shit shouldn't have like a statute of limitations, legally, in my opinion. Although that's not always the case everywhere, which just shows how upside down certain rule sets could be, legal or otherwise. But also from a social perspective, from this cancel culture perspective, shouldn't be the way either, in my opinion. When it comes to things like an off-color joke or, something that, today could be considered a taboo word that shouldn't be said, but, 10 years ago, it was said, that wasn't the case 10 years ago, basically. It's like bizarro world when you try to pull things from the past into the present and say, see, you did X, Y, and Z. It's like, yeah, but that wasn't the law back then, or that was the norm back then, etc. Anyway, I digress. But he brings up the iconic video, which if you guys haven't seen, I'm gonna drop it in to the audio here so you guys can take a look, can hear it, can listen to it, because it is fucking wild. But I'll also link to it in the episode notes in case you guys want to watch it, because he does it with such a straight face. But Bill brings up the iconic Sean Connery video when he's being interviewed on like 2020 or like Barbara Walters show, which might be one and the same, I'm not sure. But Sean Connery was known for being misogynist, and she checks him on it and asks him, thinking that she kind of like cornered him into a corner, in a interview that's going to be seen by a very wide audience. And she says something to the effect of, but you think it's okay to hit a woman? You've alluded to that in the past, or you've said it in the past, etc. So, something along those lines was her question, and expecting him to say, maybe something a little bit more PC than what he actually said, maybe something along the lines of, no, of course not, we should never resort to that, etc. blah blah blah. And this is Sean Connery, and Sean Connery was fucking Sean Connery, like James Bond era Sean Connery, if I'm not mistaken. Definitely a big time actor already. That's why he's on the show. And then he just comes back with a straight face and says something along the lines of, no, you speak to women sternly, and sometimes they just want to act up and they merit a slap or a backhand, and that's all right. some wild shit along those lines. But the hilarious thing of that situation is him saying that with a straight face, even then. But in the context of Bill's bit, he's saying, back then it was not that it was good or a positive thing, but men hitting women, or women being housewives and being abused and tolerating abuse from their husbands because the husbands were the breadwinners and women didn't work and they were more just like under their husband's thumb and stuff like that in like the early 70s, was like, that statement was more from that time. That statement said in 2021 is a fucking wild, crazy statement, or in 2022 is a wild, crazy statement. But in the early 1970s, it was kind of like, yeah, I know 2 or 3 broads that come from domestic violence or something like that. You know what I mean? But it's definitely wild. If you guys have not seen that video, definitely search for it. Again, I'm going to try to link to it in the episode notes so you guys can check it out. And if I remember, I'll write myself a note here to drop it in the audio stream for you guys.
Playing golf with men than women.
Years ago, you did an interview, which may come back to haunt you. You know what I'm going to say, right?
No.
Okay. You did an interview in which you said, not the worst thing to slap a woman now and then. As I remember, you said you don't do it with a clenched fist. It's better to do it with an open hand. Yeah. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I didn't love that.
I haven't changed my opinion.
You haven't?
No, not at all.
You think it's good to slap a woman?
No, I don't think it's good. I
think it's bad?
I don't think it's that bad. I think that it depends entirely on the circumstances and if it merits it. Yeah.
What would merit it?
Well, if you have tried everything else, and women are pretty good at this, they can't leave it alone. They want to have the last word, and you give them the last word, but they're not happy with the last word. They want to say it again and get into a really provocative situation. Then I think it's absolutely right.
To give her a good slap?
Yeah, absolutely.
What if she gives you a good slap back?
Well, then you get into another area. I mean, then maybe she's getting to like it, and then it becomes something else. I don't know. But seriously, I think that it's the last resort. He's not going to do it because he wants to do it. Huh?
Wait till people see this interview. Are you going to get mail?
Might get some female.
I like this bit about feminists and how they blame men for women's sports not being as popular as men's sports, like women's boxing and the WNBA, etc. And he was saying something along the lines of, instead of blaming men, feminists should be packing out those fucking stadiums and rooting on the women, because the reason why their sports are not as popular is because they don't draw as much of an audience for whatever reason. But that was a good takeaway. And he kept playing around with this theme of, archetypes of people in the context of their time. He compared parenting now, and being a dad now, and how kids are like, hey dad, want to play? Hey dad, let's go ride bikes. Hey dad, let's go toss the ball, etc., etc. And he was like, back in the 70s and the 80s, it was like, dad's coming, oh fuck, it's dad, run, get the fuck out of here. It was like you were scared and terrified of your father. And then he ties that those same concepts of parenting then versus parenting now, and makes fun of himself in how there was this bit where he painted a perfect picture of him yelling at his phone for getting frustrated about something, having a short fuse and anger issues, and him if you listen to his podcast or have listened to Burr on other podcasts or have just followed his stand-up career, his anger and dealing with his anger issues are a common through line in his life. But he talks about how now having kids, and especially his oldest, which again I think is around 4 or 5 years old, his daughter, he says it helps soften him up and makes him check that behavior when he recognizes it. So he's flipping out on something on the phone, and then his kid walks in and was like, oh, I'm sorry daddy, I'm sorry, because she was freaked out. She thought that he was yelling at her, and then he got down and apologized and explained to her that it wasn't her. And he felt like shit because he was like, I'm committing the same mistakes that my dad committed. And I thought that was a dope, vulnerable, teachable moment there, which he segued into how then his wife, noticing that situation, pulls him aside. He eventually, when the kid's not around, starts yelling at him for him not controlling his anger issues and stuff like that. And I thought it was hilarious the way that he mimicked her yelling at him and how he was tuning her out, and he did so by moving the mic away from his mouth to demonstrate it, while he just kept talking in her voice and stuff like that. But since he was tuning her out, it was her voice to him from his perspective was getting fainter and fainter and going further away. And I thought that was some pretty cool quote unquote method acting, or whatever you would call that. Then the last piece that I'll share with you guys was his abortion joke, which I thought was classic. And he says something to the effect of how he's pro-choice, but he understands both sides of the argument, especially now being older, getting a bit more conservative as one does with age, but still leaning left, but more balanced. And he's like, now I can at least like hear the other side without, my complete biases, etc. Like with his biases, blinding him and not even allowing him to hear an opposing opinion on anything, as is the case for the most part in politics nowadays. But he was like, I'm pro-choice, but I definitely get both sides of the argument. And he gives examples of both sides of the argument that are like logical, sound examples of why someone's pro-choice versus why someone's pro-life. And he's like, essentially the pro-life argument is that you're killing something within you, whether you want to call it a zygote or reference a certain gestation period or whatever it is. But whatever you're stopping, the process that you're stopping within you, whether it's a cell or a clump of cells, whatever it is, whatever you're stopping, if you didn't stop it, you would have had a baby in 9 months. So it's not like technically you're killing a baby, but what's going on there? You know what I mean? And that's the pro-life claim to fame. And on the pro-choice side, it's, my body, my choice. It's not a life. Because that's essentially what the argument is, right? Like, at which point is there a life? When there's a heartbeat, people argue everything from the moment the sperm. Some people would argue that the sperm is life. That's why you're not supposed to like jerk off and shit, to certain very strict orthodox type beliefs. Some people, it's the moment the sperm cracks the egg. Some people, it's when a zygote forms, or after the first trimester, after the second trimester, there's a spectrum of full-grown baby, and on the other side of the spectrum, no baby. And you can find arguments for every single day, every single second, every single step in between those 2 points within a 9-month period. And he was saying how the pro-choice stance is that it's not a life yet. So it's my body, my choice, and it's okay to have an abortion. And he was like, although I'm pro-choice, I kind of get the other side's argument on it, because he was like, it's like if I mix some cake batter and I put it in the oven, and then you come and you take it out before the cake is done and you throw it across the room, and I'm like, you ruined my birthday cake. And you say, that wasn't a cake. And I'm like, well, it was gonna be. Yes, it was a good one. And that, folks, was my little recap and review of Bill Burr's latest comedy special, Live at Red Rocks, streaming now on Netflix. Check it out. 4th of July is a film written by Joe List and Louis C.K. and is directed by Louis C.K. And you know what I got to go back and watch is Louis C.K.'s 2 recent specials. Or not recent. One of them is recent. One of them is, I think, from last year. But his 2 latest specials, which I haven't seen. But one of them, I believe it was Sorry, or the one after Sorry. I think the first one was called Sorry, which was his first one back after being quote unquote canceled for asking a chick if he could jerk off while she watched, allegedly, or something along those lines. And his first comedy special back from then was Sorry, and then there was another one. And I think it was the most recent one that he won a Grammy for? Grammy or Emmy? Emmy, I think. One of those, which one's for music? A Grammy? It's Selena, she's here for the Grammys. Yeah, Grammys for music, so an Emmy. He won an Emmy for it. And this is canceled, the Louis C.K. Still so ill at his craft that within the very PC, bougie establishment culture, the pinnacle of which are these award shows, he still won. So I definitely want to go back and watch those. And also just on the strength of Louis' other work, like his other specials I've seen were great. The show Louis was awesome. Horace and Pete, which I want to say I spoke about on the podcast, but it's been so long that I don't remember. And if I didn't, I will in the future because I plan to rewatch it. But I always said that Horace and Pete, which was a miniseries that Louis C.K. wrote and I believe directed as well, was, at least at the time that I saw it, I felt this way. And it's been so long since I've seen it, I don't know if it still holds up, but what I said is that it's the best thing that I've ever seen, whether it be movie, TV show, short, etc. It's the best thing that I've ever seen, the best piece of work that I've ever seen. So if I didn't give my little recap and review and breakdown here in the podcast, when I rewatch it, I definitely owe that to you guys. But anyway, circling back to 4th of July. This is a film. Let me read you the synopsis actually, first of all. It's a recovering alcoholic and jazz pianist from New York City confronts his acerbic family during their annual 4th of July vacation. Acerbic. I like that word. I'm going to have to use that as a word of the week within the Spun Today newsletter that if you do not subscribe to, you should, because you don't know what you're missing, Jack. spuntoday.com/subscribe, where one of the 5 things that you get is a word of the week. And stay tuned for the word acerbic, which will be making its debut on the list. Acerbic means sour or severe, sarcastic or cynical. Interesting. It's definitely fitting to how they depict Joe List's family within this movie. Now, Joe List, for you guys that do not know, I think I've spoken about him before on the podcast. He's a stand-up comedian. He's really funny. He's a podcaster. He has a podcast called Tuesdays with Stories, which he co-hosts with Mark Norman, another one of my favorite comedians right now. He has another podcast which I've seen clips of actually, but I haven't watched or listened to, which is Joe and Renan Talk Movies. But I've definitely heard him. I think, but the first time I ever heard of Joe List was on Ari Shafir's Skeptic Tank podcast. Same for Mark Norman. When Ari did the move from like LA to New York, and then he started like having like all the New York comics like on his podcast. I got put onto a bunch of comedians, and it's dope with Ari's style of podcast, especially because he does what I like to do when I have a guest on, which is a deep dive into the guest and what it is that they do. He has another podcast, which I'm not sure if he still has it going, but Joe List's Mindful Metal Jacket, and he's been on Rogan, of course, etc. He has a special or 2 on YouTube that you guys can check out. I believe he has one on Netflix as well. If it's not a full one, it's one of those like So-and-So Presents, or, you know, when there's like a cast of a bunch of comics doing like 15 minutes or half hour each. I've definitely seen a special or 2 of his on YouTube. This movie, 4th of July, is loosely but very closely based on his life. He is a recovering alcoholic, Joe List. He is not a jazz pianist, but, well, maybe he is, shit, I don't know, on his spare time, but he's a comic. And I guess they use jazz pianist in New York because they kind of have like the same grind, I would think, you know, just going club to club, playing gigs. You know, it's a creative pursuit, it's an artistic craft, and it's something that didn't have to take center stage in the movie. You know, like what he did wasn't as important because the movie's about him confronting his demons and his family. And what's wild is if you listen to some of Joe List's stories on, you know, podcasts that he's been on, like I mentioned before, he'll tell you like the wild days of when he would just go on benders and be drinking and like black out and just be fucked up for days at a time, wake up at different people's houses that he didn't know. He tells this one hilarious yet sad story of how he was like so drunk and fucked up, and he's like at this chick's house that he hooked up with, and he really had to take a shit, but she had left to go to work. And I'm probably butchering the story, but I think it ends up with him shitting in her shoe or sneaker or something like that, just because that's how like drunk and fucked up he was. And then he just like left. Good thing this guy's sober, right? But yeah, it was his first time writing something, you know, movie based, like screenplay, if I'm not mistaken. And if I'm not mistaken, it's also his first time acting. And I thought he did a tremendous job at both. Louis C.K. killed it directing. It was kind of reminiscent to me of Horace and Pete, the way it was shot. I don't know what about it. Can't put my finger on it. But, or maybe it is this. Something I wrote down is that it felt like really intimate. And I don't know what technique it is, but you know what it reminds me of also a little bit? The way that the last season of the Aziz Ansari show, fuck, I can't think of the name. Going to Italy is my favorite thing. Going to Italy is my favorite thing. Fuck. And the last season that was mainly Lena Waithe, Something in Love. Fuck. Anyway, the way that last season was shot, which Aziz directed, like that, like close up, lingering shots and stuff like that. I felt that way about this 4th of July. And this was, again, like a traumatic story of Joe List, of his life and how he became sober, came from a dysfunctional family, a lot of which were alcoholics still, and how he just was going to therapy. Louis C.K. plays his therapist. And year after year, his family has this 4th of July getaway vacation that they do. And year after year, he tries to build up the courage to like stand up to them and tell them, yo, I'm fucked up because of you guys and how you treat me and this and that. We're fucked up growing up, etc. But always bails and never actually follows through and says anything. And this movie shows, spoiler alert, the year that he actually does go through with it and actually say something. And here are just some more random takeaways and moments that resonated with me throughout the film. One of which was his dad. His dad's character, to me, was like an example of where Joe's life was headed if he kept bottling things up. Because his mother was definitely like the matriarch of the family, you know, like the shot caller. And the father was a quiet pushover type that you felt in each scene that he was in, he was about to say something or wants to say something. He's like bursting on the inside, but then ultimately just goes through that moment that I'm sure we're all familiar with from, you know, different points or times in our lives where we're at that point where we want to say something, then we're just like, fuck it. What's the point? And you internalize it and keep it inside. So his father was like this character that had been that way his entire life. And I felt that his father to Joe was like a mirror of, yo, this is what you're going to become if you don't say something. And I think they underscored it, like that point that I'm trying to make, you know, and again, this is like my opinion, but I believe that they underscored it by showing how when Joe List would have like a panic or an anxiety attack, like there would be like a green hue on the screen. So you're like seeing things through Joe's eyes and everything looks like greenish. And when they showed things through the point of view through the father's perspective, you kind of saw this like greenish hue as well at certain points. So I felt like that was showing like the father going through like anxiety attacks and dealing with the same shit that Joe was dealing with, just that he continued to bottle it up for his entire life. And the family was like definitely dysfunctional. Each member of the family had like something fucked up with them aside from just the constant drinking and being alcoholics. And the movie, you know, true to the folks making it, being Joe List and Louis C.K. and the myriad of comics like Nick DiPaolo and Bobby Kelly that were in it. It was dramatic, and the content of the story was very vulnerable and heavy, but there were definitely moments of levity, and these guys know how to make shit funny, you know? They're literal funny makers. And it was really interesting how they managed to do that, even like not just sprinkled throughout the whole movie, but within specific scenes that were heavy. Like, for example, when Joe, again, spoiler alert, when Joe List finally stands up to his family, in the aftermath of it, like the mother's like in a catatonic state, you know, being all dramatic and shit. And his uncle, which was like a year or two older than him, so they like grew up kind of like best friends, but he's technically his uncle. You know, they had like this deep yet shallow heart-to-heart moment about what was going on, and then he like ends it with, come on, man, you have to talk to her, you have to say something, there's no food here, because the mother was like the one that always like made the food and got everybody together, etc. So that was pretty funny. And what was cool is that the dad, there was a scene where I thought, and I guess this was like purposeful like misdirection or a bit of a red herring here, but there was a scene where the father was going to bed early while everybody was like still up, like extra early, you know, they had just finished eating or something like that, and they would usually like hang out and drink and then go to bed. And he's like having a bit of an anxiety attack. You see that like that greenish hue, but then he's like, he tells the wife, oh, I'm gonna go lay down. She was like, what, you going to bed so early? Why, are you okay? You feeling all right? He's like, yeah, I'm okay, I'm just going to bed. Then he goes to bed, and you kind of see him like looking around at everybody, and it's like he's like saying his goodbyes. And I was like, oh fuck, he's gonna die. He's gonna like die in his sleep or something, and the movie's gonna take like this dark turn. And that doesn't happen. But what the dad does do is that he finally stands up to the mom in a way, which is probably big for them in the dynamic of their relationship, because you could tell that it was always like a what she said goes, and he just, dealt with shit type of relationship. And he felt so badly about the son, Joe List, blowing up at them and telling them off basically, and like unloading years of like pent up frustration and resentment and just like all his like anxiety and angst and issues like onto them, that the father kind of stood up to the mom by not agreeing with her and telling her that she was wrong, and not doing so in front of everybody, just doing it in the intimacy of their own bedroom. Then you fast forward a bit, and then there's a scene where like the mom is out of her like catatonic state or whatever, and then she actually tells off Joe List like, how dare you, I'm your mother and you think all these things about me and blah blah blah, and pretty much give like her side to the shit, because there's always two sides, right? And Joe List kind of like just takes it, but she like half-ass kind of sort of, but not really, apologizes, but just by like acknowledging like the situation. And then they all go on and continue their weekend, and Joe List thanks his dad. He's on the phone, he's like distracted with something, probably with Bobby Kelly's character, who was hilarious, who was Joe List's sponsee. Like Joe List was his sponsor in AA, and Bobby Kelly would just like show up places like randomly, like on some stalker shit. He was out there on the phone with him or with his girl, but he stops to like thank and acknowledge his dad, and just like tells him thank you, because he somehow knew that he had said something to the mother. And then in the end, spoiler alert again, in a scene that I really liked, I really appreciated, he just like went up to his mom while she was setting the table, and he just hugged her, not expecting like a hug in return or anything, but he like hugged her and then just kept it moving, and it showed, because the mom was like this tough love like kind of mother, and was like, oh, what do you want, you crying, you want to feel loved, whatever, who puts food on the table for you, who put a roof over your head all those years, and blah 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 blah, what do you want, a fucking hug? It's like that type. Because when he initially complained to them, he was complaining about, we don't show each other love and this and that, and all these like touchy-feely emotional like type things, right? So then at the end, it kind of like shows him, and again, this is my opinion, not projecting like that, like those wants and desires of how he wanted his mother to act and like his family to act towards him, but rather just like accepting them for who they are and taking ownership of things and realizing that everything is not happening to him necessarily. People are just being who they are. And he also has a say in how he affects people and situations around him. Like by just, you want a hug? Go up to your mother and you hug her then, if she's not giving you that. Like you're part of that dynamic as well, like it or not. And I thought that was a dope full circle moment for Joe List's character. And lastly, I'd say about the movie, definitely check out as well the deleted scenes, which were really good. But the way Joe and Louis broke it down, they were either redundant or they didn't fit the tone of the movie. So they deleted the scenes, but like in and of themselves, like they're pretty cool scenes to see. And when you see them, you're like, yeah, this kind of didn't fit with the movie that I just watched. So it made sense. And it also gave me like an appreciation for editing. Not that I didn't appreciate it before, but them describing it that way and me seeing how those scenes didn't match up to the movie that I watched, like just gave me a better understanding of how editing could affect the project. You know how they say in every movie, for every movie that you watch, there was like 3 movies that were made. Like for example, the first movie that was made was the movie that was written on paper. The second movie that was made was the movie that was directed. And the third movie that's made is the movie that gets edited in the editor's bay. Even though it's all the same movie, different intentions, different perspectives, different things happen in each one of those different stages. And lastly, what I really appreciated about the movie as well is that they used a ton of comics to act throughout. And I thought that was really cool. And obviously a testament to Joe List and Louis C.K. both being comics. And that is my little recap and review of the movie 4th of July, which is available now for you all to purchase and stream via louisck.com. I'll link to it in the episode notes so you guys can check it out. A Journal for Jordan was written by, and let me give a shout out to the writers here, Because if I don't give a shout out to the writers here on the Spun Today podcast, who will? A Journal for Jordan was written by Virgil Williams. He wrote the screenplay, and it's based on the book by Dana Kennedy, which is based on the personal journal of Charles Monroe King, because this movie is based on a true story. And Charles Monroe King is played by none other than Michael B. Jordan. My guy has come a long way since Wallace. Am I right? And the cherry on top, it's directed by none other than Denzel Washington. What a dope combination. And here is the official synopsis. First Sergeant Charles Monroe King, before he was killed in action in Baghdad, authors a journal for his son, intended to tell him how to live a decent life despite growing up without a father. Hence the title, A Journal for Jordan. Jordan is his son. Let me tell you a little bit about Dana Kennedy. She's an American journalist that worked at the New York Times for over 20 years. In 2001, she won a Pulitzer Prize for co-authoring a series called How Races Lived in America. Her segment in that series that won the Pulitzer Prize was called The Hurt Between the Lines, a newsroom divides after a healing series on race, which focused on the similar yet divergent paths of two award-winning columnists, one which was white and one which was black, from the Akron Beacon Journal. She then wrote the memoir, A Journal for Jordan, a story of love and honor, back in 2008. And this grew out of an essay that she wrote for the New York Times about the death of her fiance, United States Army First Sergeant Charles Monroe King, which died in the Iraq War. Her husband in the movie is played by Michael B. Jordan. And the way they depicted it in the movie is that she came from this military family. Her father was in the military, and Michael B. Jordan came up under her father and really respected her father a lot. And her father, by the way, was played by Robert Wisdom, and his character's name is Sergeant T.J. Kennedy. Robert Wisdom, better known as Howard Bunny Colvin, or Major Bunny Colvin from The Wire. So you got Bunny Colvin and Wallace reuniting for this beautiful piece of work. And Dana grows up in this military family. You know, she's very independent. Her family's from the Midwest. She moves to New York. Her father knows that she's like very driven and strong-minded, and he kind of sort of makes it so that Charles Monroe King and her meet at this like family function get together, and they actually do wind up hitting it off. And long story short, they start a relationship. And throughout the movie, she's like somewhat reluctantly easing into this relationship, and there's like this instant connection between the two. You're definitely rooting for them, and you're also kind of, or at least I was, skeptical at first about Michael B. Jordan's character, because he was kind of like too good to be true-ish, if that makes any sense. Like from her perspective, he was like a good man, seemed like a family man, but he did have some like baby mama drama, kind of, because he had a kid with another woman that he's no longer with. But he seemed like uber respectful and always said the right thing, didn't seem to have like faults. So she was understandably like guarded towards him. He was nice and respectful to like all her friends, everybody liked him basically. And they make that case in point, I believe, with the door guy in her building, the building that she lives in New York. When he comes to visit, he becomes friendly with the doorman, you know, because he's coming and going so much. And he gives the doorman he brings the doorman a Mets hat one day, just because he had mentioned that, you know, he's a Mets fan. And he was just like that kind of dude, you know. He was very much so about his business though. And by his business, I mean war. Playing his position within the structure of the military that he was in. And he was even in that, he was like the quintessential soldier, led by example, never asked his men to do anything that he wouldn't do, was on the front lines, even though he was in charge of like a full platoon, I believe is the correct terminology, but don't kill me because I could be off. To the point that actually, to a fault, you could say, because he missed the birth of his son because he chose to stay in battle because his men were still on the battlefield, even though he could have gotten the reprieve to, be there with his wife and kid when he was born. So in my eyes, that's a fault, but we all make choices, right? I also can't pretend to even think that I understand the level of camaraderie that comes from sharing a battlefield with someone, especially if you're in charge of those someones and you're sending them out to battle. But the movie was shot in an interesting way because it's a lot of flashback scenes. So you see Dana Kennedy's character, played by Shantae Adams, speaking with her son Jordan, played by Jalen Christian, and him asking questions about his father and her telling him stories. And then while telling those stories, it flashes back to, the point in time of that story. So you find out how they met, and then it flashes to the future where, it shows her like alone without him, but she has a kid from him. Then it flashes back again and you see some more stories of, like them dating and, progressing in their relationship. Then it flashes forward again. And each time that it flashes forward and flashes back, it's like you're getting like a bookend of the story. Like, he's around at one point, and then at one point he's not around, and he's in the army, and you expect that since it's called a journal for Jordan, that, he dies or something tragic happens. And each time it flashes back and forth, it's like the walls of each side of those flashbacks are like closing in on what inevitably happened to Charles King. And in the story, she's the one that gives him the journal. She says, while you're overseas and you're thinking about your son, write to him and, just tell him what kind of man you are, what you think about things, what kind of man you want him to be. And this is, needless to say, one of the treasured possessions of the son of Jordan. And it's riddled with life lessons and perspectives from his father, which he obviously doesn't have around anymore. It's a beautiful story though. Beautiful tragedy, as they say. Definitely made me want to bust out a couple journals for my boys. But thankfully, if they can bear listening to my voice, they'll have at least a few hundred hours of my meanderings and perspectives and ideas and shit to listen to here on this podcast. All part of the plan, right? Yeah, Dana Kennedy's character had these really great friends. It's another takeaway I had from the movie. In Miriam, played by Susan Porfar, and Ciro, not sure how to pronounce that, played by Gray Henson. And Charles King actually had prearranged with them and with the army that if something happened to him, if he died, that they would be notified first, her two closest friends, so that they can be there when the news was broken to her. And spoiler alert, that's what happened. They walk in one day into the apartment and she's like, what are you guys doing here? Then the phone rings and she's like, hold on a second. They have these somber looks on their eyes, and she gets the news on the phone that Charles King and his men were driving in Iraq, and one of the cars either in front of him or behind him, one of the Humvees were blown up, and the car he was in, I believe, flipped over, and he comes out and they were ambushed, basically being shot at, and he was shot. And while he lay there on the floor dying, and one of the other soldiers were trying to help him and revive him, telling him to stay awake, he just reached into his pocket where he had a picture of his wife and kid, and just stared at them until he drifted away into death. And Dana's getting this news on the phone while our friends are there, again for that purpose, to be there when she gets this bad news and kind of be her shoulders to cry on. And then in the movie, as the son Jordan, he's more grown up now. He's like a young teenager, and constantly inquiring about his dad and asking questions and reading different passages in the journal, and asking his mom to fill in some blanks and stuff, and asking about the backstory to certain things that his father had written. They take this trip to Arlington National Cemetery where deceased soldiers are buried, which, by the way, was something that was not factual from the movie. The family actually opted to have Charles King buried elsewhere, I believe closer to the family. But they, obviously took creative license with that and showed him at Arlington National Cemetery because it is, again, known for being the final resting place of deceased soldiers here in the U.S. in Washington. And the son, wanted to take this trip to see where his dad is buried. And that's like the arc of the story, right? Like the mother's going back and telling him all these stories while they're like preparing for this trip. And unbeknownst to the mother, the son had reached out to all these different people that Charles King, his father, whose lives he touched. There were a couple soldiers whose lives he saved by giving up his own. His grandparents were there, like the parents of Dana Kennedy, her friends, Manny, the door guy, who is still rocking, by the way, the now dusty and older Mets cap. And the son joined them there so that they can all visit together, and ended it by reading a short passage from his father's journal, which I won't spoil for you guys because I want you to check out the movie. A Journal for Jordan, available now on Starz. And I believe you can also watch it on Amazon Prime. And I'm sure eventually it'll make his way through the gamut like a lot of movies usually do and wind up on HBO and then on Netflix and then here and there. You can always download it. But either way, definitely watch it. Highly recommend. A Journal for Jordan. Check it out. And that, folks, was episode 215 of the Spun Today podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. Hope you took some insights from it. I hope you got to listen to a different perspective on either one of the things that I broke down, whether it be one of the movies or the stand-up comedy. And I hope you're enjoying the pod because I definitely enjoy putting it out there for your listening pleasure. Please stick around to listen to a few ways that you can help support the Spun Today podcast if you so choose. And I really hope that you do because it helps me keep the lights on. It helps free up time for me to write more and create more content and record more shows. Focus on putting out more clips on YouTube and Instagram and really taking the steps towards building the show up to what I know it can be. So please stick around, listen to a few ways you can show your support and pick one or two of those ways to do just that. All right, episode 215 in the books. Peace. What's up, folks? Tony here. I hope you're enjoying this podcast as much as I enjoy producing it for you. Here are a few quick ways you can help support this show. You can support the Spun Today podcast by going to spuntoday.com/support. There, you'll find my merch section, where you can cop the iconic Podcasts vs. Anybody t-shirt in a wide variety of different colors and all different sizes. Also, if you're into cycling, you can cop the super soft, comfortable, minimalist design Spun Today Bike Club t-shirt. Also available in a bunch of different colors in all different sizes. There are a few other designs of different types of t-shirts. Definitely go there and check it out. spuntoday.com/support. It's the merch section, where you can also get a dope coffee mug. I have coffee mugs with the brand new redesigned Spun Today logo on one side and the tagline that I end every show with on the other, which is start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. The mug is available in both black and white because we don't discriminate here at the Spun Today podcast. Again, go to spuntoday.com/support and check out the merch section. You can support the Spun Today podcast by checking out my writing. You can go to spuntoday.com/free writing and check out some of my free association writing, which is intended to be some cathartic free writing, but oftentimes doubles down as motivation for myself and others. At spuntoday.com/short stories, you can read a bunch of the different short stories that I've written and actually listen to the audiobook versions of those short stories there as well. Another way you can help support my writing is by going to spuntoday.com/books and checking out what I have in store for sale. Digital copies are available in all formats, whether it be Kindle, iBooks, or a different type of e-reader. You can also purchase paperback copies if that's your preferred reading method. Currently available, I have my nonfiction, Make Way for You, which is a collection of freely written thoughts that were curated and put together as tips for getting out of your own way. Also available is my debut time travel novel titled FRACTAL. Again, go to spuntoday.com/books to show your support. Support the Spun Today podcast by following me on social at Spun Today on Twitter, at Spun Today on Instagram. Please also check out and like my Facebook page, facebook.com/Spun Today, and subscribe to my YouTube page as well. On my YouTube page, not only will you get these full-length episodes, but you'll also get to check out some chopped up clips and bonus content. To get to my YouTube page, just search Spun Today on YouTube or click on any of the YouTube icons on the footer of my website. Also, don't forget to rate and review this podcast wherever it is that you're listening. It really does help. The Spun Today newsletter is available to each and every one of my listeners absolutely for free. All you have to do is go to spuntoday.com/subscribe and drop in your email address. What I'm going to do is brighten up everybody's least favorite day of the week by delivering 5 curated things within my weekly newsletter every Monday at noon. You're going to receive a photo of the week, a recommended podcast of the week. I listen to tons of podcasts from an array of varied interests. I cherry pick the very best ones so that you can check them out. I also share a video of the week, which can be anything from a tasty recipe to a dope rap battle to an enlightening TED Talk. I also share a quote of the week. And finally, for my fellow wordsmiths out there, a word of the week so that you can step up your vocab. Again, this curated list is yours absolutely free by going to spuntoday.com/subscribe and dropping in your email address, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Again, go to spuntoday.com/subscribe, drop in your email address, and you'll get the very next one. If you want to help support the Spun Today podcast financially, you can do so by going to spuntoday.com/support. Here you'll find a few different ways that you can do so. You can shop on Amazon, but first go to my website, spuntoday.com/support, click on the Amazon banner, which will take you to Amazon's website where you do your shopping like you normally do. It will not cost you anything extra, but I will get credit for driving traffic to their website. Another cool way that you can help support this show is through Patreon, where you can set up reoccurring donations to my podcast, whether it be $1 per show, $2 per show, etc. And depending on how much you choose to pledge, you will receive some Patreon perks in return. Things like free writing pieces, free bookmarks, free digital copies of my books, etc. Again, my Patreon link can be found at spuntoday.com/support. You can also set up similar reoccurring payments via my Ko-fi page. And if you want to send a one-time happiness bomb donation, if you will, you can do so via my PayPal link. Again, all of which can be found at spuntoday.com/support. If you're a fellow creative, a cool way that you can help support the Spun Today podcast and actually be part of the podcast is by filling out my 5-question questionnaire located at spuntoday.com/questionnaire. Here you'll find 5 open questions related to your craft, your art, what inspires you to create, what type of unrelated hobbies you're into, and what motivates you to get your work done. You can choose to remain anonymous or plug your website and your work. And once you submit your questionnaire, I read your responses on a future episode of the Spun Today podcast. It's completely free at no cost to you. And what I like to say about it is that if your responses could potentially spark inspiration in someone else, why not share that? spuntoday.com/questionnaire. And as always, folks, substitute the mysticism with hard work and start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. Thanks for listening. I love you, Aiden.
I love you, Daddy.